Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of our CSEC lecture series. My name is Alexis McDavid. I am an outreach officer at the Institute of Jamaica, and I am located in the National Museum Jamaica division on East Street, downtown Kingston. And this event is a collaborative effort between the University of the West Indies History and Archaeology Department and the Institute of Jamaica. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in today. And our lecturer today, Professor Bryan, is on a Zoom call with us. Now, Prof. Bryan needs no introduction, but his introduction will be in the bio link below on our social media platforms. And Prof. Bryan will be speaking about the U.S. involvement in the Spanish and the British Caribbean, one of the themes on the CSEC lecture syllabus, syllabus. So, Prof, thanks so much for coming and participating today, and the floor is yours, Prof.
Today, I will be examining the strategic, the economic, and the political interests of the United States in the Spanish Caribbean, from the early 19th century through to 1934. By way of background, I will refer to the continental expansion of the United States in the 19th century. I refer to the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. I will look at the strategic importance of the Panama Canal, and also at the United States sugar industries in the Caribbean. And finally, some notes on the nationalistic responses to United States domination. When the United States declared its independence from Great Britain in the 1770s, it was a relatively small nation consisting of 13 states on the Atlantic coast. By the end of the 19th century, there were over 40 states. The expansion from east to west across the continent absorbed Louisiana, purchased from France, Florida, taken from Spain by treaty in the 1820s. Wars against neighboring Mexico in the middle of the 19th century added, among other states, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and California. Native American territories were also steadily absorbed. The steady westward expansion finally brought the United States to the Pacific coast. Interest, meanwhile, in the Caribbean focused on Cuba, which the United States tried unsuccessfully on at least 4 occasions to purchase from Spain. The idea was to integrate Cuba into the American Union, to strengthen the votes of the slave-holding South. Gradually, after 1884, Cuba, as well as the Dominican Republic, became targets of United States investment in sugar estates. By 1890, the United States had significant investments in Cuban sugar estates, which were to expand significantly after 1900. One attempt was actually made to annex the Dominican Republic in 1870, but that attempt failed through one dissenting vote in the United States Senate. Overseas expansion followed this continental expansion in 1898. In that year, the United States intervened in the Cuban War of Independence against Spain. A defeated Spain surrendered Cuba, which became a protectorate, until its independence in 1902, and Puerto Rico was also taken over, and it became what was called an unincorporated territory of the United States, a colony in all but name. The United States also took the Spanish Philippines and Hawaii in the Pacific. Indeed, after 1898, the United States had become an important world power. And this power was not only because of its physical expansion, but because of its massively increasing population through immigration, increase in manufacturing production, increase in urbanization, and increasing financial power. The United States also, we should mention, considered itself the promoter of Anglo-Saxon Protestant civilization against what it regarded as backward Catholic countries. For example, the occupation of Catholic Cuba in 1898 started the promotion of United States cultural norms, including Protestantism. Baptists in eastern Cuba established some 44 churches. Not surprisingly, the United States encouraged the teaching of English, the employment of United States teachers and texts, and provided opportunities for Cubans to study in the United States to ensure closer cultural ties. Cultural domination would ensure that it would be difficult, as the governor declared, to shake Cuba loose from its new United States association. Another important area of expansion was the United States Navy. The growth of the United States Navy generated a demand for coaling stations and naval bases. The purchase of the Danish West Indies in 1917, for example, and interest in Samana Bay in the Dominican Republic and Mole St. Nicholas in Haiti all reflected the new naval strategies. And indeed, the independent Cuban government gave to the United States an indefinite lease of Guantanamo Bay as a naval station in 1903 through the Platt Amendment. But most spectacular was the naval and engineering work, constructing a canal across the Isthmus of Panama between 1904 and 1914. The canal, intended to speed up the movement of ships between the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts, avoided the long and hazardous route around the stormy Cape Horn at the tip of South America and northwards to the US Pacific coast. Access to land across the isthmus to build the canal was one early example of United States intervention in the Caribbean. The United States was party to a rebellion in Panama, which declared Panama independent of Colombia, of which it was a province. The US, having immediately recognized Panamanian independence, received from the new Republic of Panama the concession of land for the construction of the canal across the isthmus. Hence, President Roosevelt's boast, "I took Panama." The protection of the canal from potential European competition, competitors, became a central aspect of US diplomatic and security interests. Also, the control by the United States of territories in the neighborhood of the canal, such as Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, became of central importance in US Caribbean strategic policy. The defense of the canal from European enemies meant protecting the sea routes leading to the canal and political control of Caribbean territories facing the canal. The Caribbean was to become the fifth frontier of the United States, which was now the most dominant imperial power in the Caribbean. Search for dominance in the Caribbean and in the hemisphere actually goes back to the United States strategy since the 1823 Monroe Doctrine to reduce the influence of Europeans in the Caribbean and in the hemisphere. Early in the 20th century, reducing European influence led to a close monitoring of the finances of the Caribbean states. A good example is the Dominican Republic, which was heavily indebted to European financiers. The Dominican Republic had actually borrowed lots of money to build railroads and so on, but they're unable to repay. Financiers in Germany, Italy, Belgium, Spain, and France. All of these states threatened military invasion of the Dominican Republic to secure repayment of the money owing to them. The United States viewed these threats of European intervention for repayment as potential violations of the Monroe Doctrine. To the Monroe Doctrine was added the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. By this corollary, the United States claimed the right, in quotation marks, to intervene in countries where heavy indebtedness to European bankers and political instability threatened intervention in violation of the Monroe Doctrine. In the case of the politically volatile Dominican Republic, which was heavily indebted to European bankers, the United States took over the receipt of Dominican customs revenues, using that revenue to repay a $20 million loan from a New York bank. These funds were used to repay the Dominican creditors. The customs receivership, to be operated by the United States appointed customs receivers, was made official by what's called the Dominican American Convention of 1907. The insistence on control of the financial arrangements of the Caribbean republics was also demonstrated in 1901 with the Platt Amendment in Cuba. By the Platt Amendment, the Cuban government was forbidden to negotiate financial arrangements with European countries without the specific agreement of the United States. The Platt Amendment also gave the United States, the United States imposed on itself the duty to intervene in Cuba to protect, quotation marks, Cuba's independence and to ensure political stability. The Platt Amendment also gave the United States permission to intervene in Cuba at its own will. So although the United States withdrew from Cuba, which became independent in 1902, the United States reoccupied Cuba between 1906 and 1909, and also intervened militarily between 1917 and 1922. Indeed, the United States consul was hailed as the most important person in Cuba. Cuba, like the Dominican Republic, had become a client state of the United States. The strategic interest in the Caribbean was accompanied by growing investment in the Spanish Caribbean. The United States, though it had annexed Puerto Rico, focused more on commercial domination. And eventually over 80% of Cuba's trade was with the United States. So the main interest was not in annexing territory, but in commercial domination. Hence, the United States has been seen as creating an informal empire through commerce rather than from formal structured imperial rule. The expanding economy of the United States and its growing financial power contributed to its new role as an exporter rather than an importer of capital. Significant corporations emerged. The American Sugar Refining Company, the United Fruit Company, which invested in both sugar and bananas, the Bartram interest in the Dominican Republic in sugar, and various companies which established railroads in Central America. Sugar was, of course, the most significant investment. The United States-based sugar industries covering all the Spanish Caribbean consisted of modern, technologically driven, and heavily capitalized enterprises. These estates, in some cases covering over 300,000 acres, made use of the railroad for internal transportation. So although United States entrepreneurs in Cuba, for example, invested in copper mines, in railroads, in banking, and in shipping companies, it was the sugar industry that most marked the increase of United States capital in the Spanish Caribbean. United States corporations such as the American Sugar Refining Company operated simultaneously in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. We refer to these usually as multinationals. United States enterprises established a new and massive sugar frontier in eastern Cuba. The American Sugar Refining Company formed the South Puerto Rico Sugar Company and established a massive sugar central at Guanica in Puerto Rico. The same company established the La Romana estate in southeastern Dominican Republic. In 1903, the United States and Cuba signed a reciprocity treaty which enabled Cuba to ship sugar to the United States at considerably reduced duties. Since Cuba was a protectorate of the United States and Puerto Rico a colony, United States investors in the sugar industry in those two islands had the advantage of producing and exporting sugar to the expanding United States consumer market with duty concessions. A modern sugar industry had also been founded beginning in the 1870s in the Dominican Republic, with Cuban and European capital on the basis of wage labor. The Dominican Republic sugar industry was concentrated in the south and southeast of the republic. In the north, however, smallholders continued to produce tobacco, cacao, and coffee, mainly for the German market. The strong German economic and political presence in the Dominican Republic and its neighbor Haiti was to prove of concern to the United States during the war years, 1914 to 1918. Given that it proved difficult to attract sufficient Dominican workers to supply plantation labor in the South, sugar planters depended heavily on labor imported from neighboring Haiti and from the British Caribbean, from St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, and the Virgin Islands. Cuba also depended on labor from the British Caribbean, particularly Jamaica, and from Haiti. In 1920, for example, nearly 25,000 Jamaicans went to work on the United States' own sugar plantations in Cuba. By 1960, most of the sugar estates in these three islands were owned by United States corporations. In the Dominican Republic, some planters indulged in sabotage in order to force the United States occupation to restore stability, but partly to ensure that the Dominican Republic would enjoy the same privileges enjoyed by Puerto Rico and Cuba. The stabilization of the political situation after the 1907 Dominican-American Convention, which we referred to earlier, gave some hope under the regime of Ramon Cáceres between 1906 and 1911 that the situation would improve. But the hope was dashed with the assassination of Cáceres in 1911 and the unrestrained political instability that followed during the next 5 years, leading to the US military occupation in 1916. Political instability was also increasing with the revolt of smallholders, small farmers, who grouped themselves in guerrilla bands called guerrillas, whose lands had been encroached upon by the expanding sugar plantations. They initiated a guerrilla war against the estates, and this guerrilla war extended itself, especially after 1917. Between 1914 and 1918, there was significant expansion of the sugar industry in the Spanish Caribbean. All Caribbean cane sugar producers benefited from rising war prices, given that beet sugar producers were at war. Market demand was enough to double cane sugar prices between 1914 and 1919. The exports of crude sugar by mainly United States-based plantations in the Dominican Republic rose from nearly 46,000 tons in 1902 to 110,000 tons in 1915, and then more than tripled between 1915 and 1926 to reach 360,415 tons in 1926. The revision of the complicated land tenure system in the Dominican Republic also enabled planters to obtain more reliable titles. So the United States intervened in the Dominican Republic for a combination of reasons. One, the continuing precarious financial situation. Two, the continuous political instability in the Dominican Republic. Three, favorable sugar markets. Four, more secure titles. And five, the real possibility of US control over the Dominican Republic, a solution that sugar magnates had long proposed. Inevitably, the safety of the canal was an important consideration in this period, 1914 to 18. The United States entered World War I in 1917. An advantage gained by the Dominican Republic through the occupation was that in the face of US-German hostilities, An advantage gained by the Dominican Republic through the occupation was that in face of US-German hostilities, Dominican cacao, coffee, and tobacco were able to enter the United States market. This meant that the United States became the main trading partner of the Dominican Republic, like Cuba and Puerto Rico. The period 1916 to 1924 was also one of pacification in the Dominican Republic. We note that the guerrilla war, starting from 1916, because of the siege of land from smallholders by the sugar estates, intensified. The United States military authorities crushed the guerrilla movement with considerable brutality. In the process, the United States authorities established a constabulary that was to emerge after the United States withdrawal from Santo Domingo in 1924 as a major instrument of stability and the tool of the 30-year dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo from 1930 to 1961. US policy generally supported other dictators in the Caribbean, such as Gerardo Machado and Fulgencio Batista in Cuba, so long as they supported United States economic interests there. The interventions of the period 1900 to 1934 ended with the good neighbor policy of 1934. The results were not always negative. For example, serious efforts had been made to increase elementary education in the Dominican Republic and to improve health institutions there. In Puerto Rico, a university was established for the first time. It can be argued, however, that by 1934, the economies of the Caribbean were so closely linked with the United States that there was, by that year, little need for military intervention. At the same time, the experience of the Caribbean with the various interventions and the economic domination of the United States had aroused strong nationalist sentiments in the Spanish Caribbean. This was particularly true in Cuba, where a revolution in 1933 clearly anticipated the 1959 Cuban Revolution. However profitable the sugar industry was for United States entrepreneurs, The reality was that unemployment and underemployment, poor medical facilities, poverty, and poor education prevailed. Puerto Rico, protesting its colonial status, experienced a nationalist upsurge in the 1930s, led by Pedro Albizu, Albizu, Campos, Campos. Albizu Campos opposed the United States cultural imperialism and emphasized the Spanish and Catholic heritage of Puerto Rico. The Dominican Republic almost equally asserted its Iberian Spanish heritage, but its experience was a bit unusual insofar as the dictator, Rafael Trujillo, was able to enrich himself and family by becoming the major plantation owner in the Dominican Republic while maintaining a close friendship with the United States. Trujillo effectively used the Cold War to cement his alliance with the United States. On the other hand, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union after World War II helped to create the socialist Cuban Revolution, for which Cuba has never been forgiven. Thank you.
So much, Prof. Bryan, for that lecture. I have 3 questions for you. The first question is, how did Spanish Spanish Caribbean political leaders respond to U.S. political and economic interests in their countries?
Yes, the response was ambivalent because there are people within these countries who benefited from the American expansion. For example, managers of sugar estates, accountants, lawyers, and other managers would have seen their economic fate as linked to American enterprise. So you do have, there are people who actually support this. On the other hand, there are many others who resented, in fact, what had happened. And an example would be the Afro-Cubans, for example, who had constituted most of the army in the struggle for independence against Spain. The United States, after 1898, disbanded the African-Cuban army. And in fact, they faced persecution. And in 1909, I think, they established an independent party of color, Partido Independiente de Color, and they ended up being massacred by the Cuban administration. There's also an injection or an intensification of racism in Cuba, in spite of the noble teachings of Jose Marti in the previous decade. So there are also nationalists generally who sought greater autonomy for Cuba or the Dominican Republic. Now, when the United States invaded and occupied the Dominican Republic in 1916, they found that they were unable to get a coalition of Dominicans to be as the sort of face of the American occupation. They were just unable to do it. So they had to resort to open military rule in the Dominican Republic until 1924. So it is not a singular response, it's several different kinds of responses to the American occupation.
My second question is, what is the difference between the Roosevelt corollary and the big stick policy?
Okay. The Roosevelt corollary took the general position that the United States would intervene in any Caribbean state where there was heavy indebtedness and or instability which could provoke foreign intervention in violation of the Monroe Doctrine. It was on the basis of this corollary, for example, that we have these events in San Domingo with the Jamaican American Convention and so on. The big stick policy does not differ in objective, but in tactic. In theory, Roosevelt said, Theodore Roosevelt that is, that you must talk softly and carry a big stick. So the big stick actually amounted to threats of intervention or piecemeal use of the Navy to keep things quiet at some plantation or the other in San Domingo or Cuba. It assumed more like a threat of force. But it also did involve the use of force. It was like some people call it gunboat diplomacy. So it was the big stick policy was in theory then a combination of the threat of force and diplomatic sanctions. So really the two things are not the same, but their objective is the same: American domination in the Caribbean.
And my last question, Prof. How did American expansion affect the British Caribbean?
Yes, very significantly. If we just dealing with the Panama Canal alone, thousands of Jamaicans and Barbadians as well were the major workers who built the canal. Also, the Cuban, in the case of the Cuban sugar industry, a high percentage of workers went to Cuba from Jamaica, where they received higher wages actually than they would have received at home. The figure usually mentioned is $1 per day, but in point of fact, many of them earned far more than $1 per day. So Cuba was seen as a useful place for Jamaicans to find work. In the case of the Dominican Republic, partly because workers in the north of the Republic were busy cultivating cacao, tobacco, and coffee, it was not possible to recruit workers from other areas of the Dominican Republic to supply all the labor needed. So the Dominican planters resorted to importation labor from the Leeward and Windward Islands, particularly Nevis, St. Kitts, the Virgin Islands, and so on. So the expansion did, and it in fact affected us directly with the formation of the United Fruit Company, which in fact began to take an interest in the Jamaican banana industry. And the Jamaican Railroad was built actually by an American company that was taken over by the Jamaican government at the beginning of the early 20th century. So it had a big impact on the British Caribbean.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor Bryan, for joining us today on this, on Zoom for our CSEC lecture series. And I just want to say to everyone out there that tuned in, please subscribe and follow us on our social media platforms. All the social media platforms for National Museum Jamaica, Institute of Jamaica, as well as the Department of History and Archaeology. And everyone stay safe and really appreciate it. Prof, thanks again for joining me today.